All right. Welcome to another of our live interviews with some fellow voices in the marriage circle and sphere and whatnot. Let me see if I can get us centered in here. Keely looks like she's hanging off the edge. All right, Keely, who are we talking to tonight? We've already seen her face.
Right. Well, I just really wanted to say thank you to Rebekah Hargraves. She's coming to interview with us today, and I got to be on her podcast maybe, what was it, a year ago, Rebekah?
Yeah.
And remind me what we talked about. I suspect it was something about sex.
Was. The title of the podcast was just Sexual Intimacy in Marriage. So we kind of covered a lot of different things from troubleshooting some things, if you have kind of a difficult past, to what the Bible has to say about sexual intimacy, to just a lot of different stuff.
So what I find interesting is that this is obviously something you're really passionate about, because when we were talking about what do you want to come on and share with the audience, you were like, let me talk about sexual intimacy. And I thought that was so interesting because that's not a huge focus on your podcast, is it?
It's not, although the podcast really is dedicated to just touching on topics that pertain to women in general. And so I had you on originally that was the first episode talking about sex. And then I had a friend on who wrote a book that's kind of like a sex talk book for teenage girls, and kind of giving like a biblical perspective of all of that. So I had her on. So we do touch on it from time to time, but we just touch on so many topics overall that pertain to women in one way or another. That's just one of many.
And how can they subscribe to your podcast?
So it is on iTunes. It's on Stitcher as well. It's the Home and Hearth podcast. And we've got other like TuneIn and the Podcast Addict app and all that. But the main ones, of course, would be iTunes and Stitcher.
Are you on Google Play yet?
I am not. No, that'll be the next thing.
Get on there. Gotta get on there.
Well, you can always look at a link down on this page to go to Rebekah's website. And Rebekah, I assume you can get to your podcast subscription through the website?
Yeah. Yes. So there's a tab at the top that says podcast, and we have a running list of all the episodes to date thus far. And if you just click on one, then it'll give you links to iTunes and Stitcher and everything. And of course, you can listen to it then on the website as well. So yeah, whether you have a smartphone or not, or whatever you may listen to podcasts on, you'll be able to listen to it somehow.
That is so awesome. I'm glad you're still going strong with it. So I always keep up with you on Instagram, see all the new episodes you're releasing.
It's so much fun.
You don't listen to podcasts, by the way.
I really don't. I always listen to the ones I'm on, and it's no offense to anyone. It's like I can listen to a podcast or do things.
She doesn't listen to the podcast the boys and I do either. So that's a podcast about science fiction. So that's like 2 strikes and we're out.
It's not in your real house.
No, it's not.
My husband's really into all that, science fiction stuff and the different like sci-fi shows and things. And I'll watch them with him depending on what it is, but it's not my first choice. That's definitely usually his. I'm like, okay, whatever. But not always my first choice.
That's where we are. So today we are talking about just this belief system that sex is just for husbands or just for guys. And I know this is something you're passionate about.
I was going to say, or the higher drive spouse.
Or the higher drive spouse, which honestly, there are a lot of women with higher drives now. Mm-hmm. We're just seeing this happen a lot. In our blog world. And I don't know if this is like an increasing issue or if it's just like people would be more vocal about it now. I have no idea. But where do you find that message to be most prevalent? Like Austin and I were talking about this earlier. I definitely feel like we're taught that sex is more for men than women, but I can't even hardly pinpoint where I've heard it.
I think part of it depends on what circles you run in. I think the culture kind of even has that idea that men are more into sex. They're more interested in it, whether it's through different movies or different just media. You kind of get that undercurrent, that idea that it is for the man. But I see it too. As a Christian, I see it a lot in the conservative sector of the church. Specifically, I hear a lot about meet your husband's needs. Like that is the phrase a lot of times in the more conservative Christian circles. You know, there's some other narratives too, but that seems to be one of the main ones. It's always like, you know, meet your husband's needs. Like it's just a duty that you do for your husband. It's just focused on him. And granted, obviously, intimacy is about the other person. You're each supposed to be focusing on the other person. So there is an aspect, I think, that's important about focusing, obviously, on your husband as a wife. But
doesn't it also, I hear you saying a lot about the husband's needs, as though the wife doesn't have any.
Yeah, exactly.
The only need a husband has is sex. Like,
right. Meet my needs can only mean one thing, right? It doesn't mean emotional connection. It doesn't mean, you know,
he's hungry.
It just means sex.
He needs his laundry cleaned, you know, just a lot of different things. Well, that's
doesn't mean he's hungry, just that he's thirsty.
Right. Exactly. I mean, it's a big thing that it's because of that culture-wide narrative that's kind of seeping into the church sometimes of men almost being animalistic, if you will. Like kind of not that sex is like this intimate, beautiful thing, but almost as if it's well, that's all men want. It's all they ever think about. And it's almost, it objectifies it, I think, into where it's not so much presented as the act of intimacy and beauty that it's portrayed as in the Bible, but it ends up being more of a, again, like you said, you know, just meeting the needs and just as if that's the only need that a husband has. And as if that act is just to meet that soul need, you know? So it's, again, I think it's primarily, and not to harp on the conservative circles of the church. I mean, that's kind of my background. And maybe that's why I hear it so much, because I kind of hail from that side of things a lot of times. But I just think it's a problem when you focus so much on the idea that you're to meet your husband's needs, because it takes the intimacy out of it, really.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, what's wrong with it just being meeting the man's needs and viewing it from that one-sided viewpoint? What's wrong with that? What does it do?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of problems. First of all, it's not biblical, but beyond that, when you're viewing sex with your husband as just something to meet his needs, just to satisfy him, just to mark, you know, check the box, okay, I've done that, there isn't intimacy there. There isn't a coming together and, you know, having sex with your husband out of love, out of desire to be with him, out of wanting to prioritize your marriage, out of wanting to grow your marriage. It ends up, again, becoming an act. And when that happens, a lot of issues ranging from, you know, you're not going to have much of a desire for it, first of all, most likely, if you just view it as something that's only for him to enjoy and you can't enjoy it, or it's not for you in any way. You're not going to probably have much of a desire to be with your husband. It's going to be kind of a duty, again, kind of something, well, I've got to do this to meet his needs and make him happy, so I'm going to go ahead and just check the box. And you're not going to enjoy it. You're not going to enjoy it in the same way as you would if you realize it's for both of you, and that's okay. I don't know if you guys have heard this saying or not, but there was a saying, I think it was in Victorian England, which they always get the short end of the stick, kind of being seen as like major prudes, you know, but there was this phrase for women that basically you were to just, and this was, I guess, handed down, you were to basically just look at the ceiling and think of England. And it's like crazy when you hear that. That was the whole like narrative. I don't remember the first time. I don't remember where I came across that the first time. But apparently this was like a common message in Victorian England. And it's like basically the connotation being sex is only for producing children and carrying on the culture in England. And so you're basically just supposed to lay there and endure it because you have to continue the English people. Like you have to keep, you know, having babies and continuing this culture. And aspects of that, I think, still carry through even today. We wouldn't say it in such crazy words, I don't think, because it does sound absurd when you say it that way. But it's still, I think, aspects of that still carry on even today when we say things like, well, it's just for the man, so you gotta do it, you know. Yeah, it just really messes with God's design as a whole, with building that intimacy and having it be something that you mutually enjoy, and that is for the growth and the health of your marriage as a whole.
So, what kind of damaging effects do you believe that we have believing that sex is just for the man?
I'm sorry, what was that? I missed the.
You okay over there? I think my microphone had some feedback. So, I mean, what are some of the damaging effects on a marriage for having that belief system? I think we did talk a little bit about how the wife maybe feels damaged, but what about for husbands?
That's a good question. Yeah. I think husbands, if they are believing their wives are only being intimate with them because they have to be, or because it's something you just do, that's a part of marriage, you have to do it, they're not going to feel desired. And that's the thing, you know, we hear so much that, oh, that's all men think about. But they want to be desired too. It's not just solely I'm going to run after my wife and catch her. Like it's truly, they want to be desired too. They may like to initiate, or they may like to, kind of be a little bit forward and kind of have that be their thing. But they also, I've talked to my husband before about this, and kind of from a husband's perspective. And he's like, yeah, men don't want to, and again, we can't talk for all men, but he's like, I don't think men generally want to go after their wives and their wives just be like, whatever, I guess I have to spend time with you tonight. You know, they want to be desired, and they have those, they want to be needed. They want to be found attractive. They want to be, have their wives want to be with them. And so if a wife is just viewing it though as something, again, that she has to do to keep him happy or to check the box of being a good wife, then it's going to mess with that too. It's going to cut down on his feelings of being loved and desired, because really there's no intimacy in it anymore. There's just you have to do this. I don't want to necessarily, but it's what I'm being called to do.
I also wonder, and maybe Austin can give some insight on this, is that if you are just portrayed as this person who's like, just like a sex hound all of the time, I mean, does it make you feel just a little bit guilty or something that you can't stop wanting this thing? I don't know.
That was something that we struggled with a little bit early on in our marriage, that I kind of had that, as much as Keely tried to convince me I was wrong about this, I had that cultural thought that women just weren't interested in sex. And so the fact that I was a lot and was the initiator, and I was going to her, I felt like I was hounding her. You were saying something about, guys don't just want to like chase their wife down and club them over the head like a caveman and drag them to the bedroom, but that's kind of how I felt sometimes. Like that's who I was. And you used that word animalistic earlier. It's portrayed that way. Like men are stupid, dumb animals that just can't control their hormones. And we're fed that and we're taught that. And that's horrible for sexual intimacy, because it makes it seem like even when I was trying not to be selfish, I felt like I was being selfish. And it took us, several years to mutually change our understanding of that. And when we did, it was huge. It was absolutely revolutionary for our entire marriage.
Yeah, it was definitely a change, because when one spouse feels like it's their duty to have sex, the other spouse thinks it, is their spouse's duty to have sex with them. It's like the husband might think, I'm just bothering my wife, and he doesn't even try to meet her needs because now he's trying to get out of there as quickly as possible.
Right. And I didn't view it as this is your duty, that you owed me that, really. But just that it was only my need. Like we said earlier, that the women don't have needs or whatever. And so it kind of felt like, well, I'm just being bothersome here. So that makes it really hard for you to take time with your wife and meet her sexual needs. When you're just saying, I gotta hurry up and quit bothering her. Makes things really difficult. Also makes you less willing. It makes you want to initiate less frequently.
That makes sense. Yeah.
There are a lot of problems that come out of that. So why don't you share with us some truths from the Bible about sexual intimacy? Because I think, you know, we come from the perspective that God designed it for us, but what else?
Yeah. Well, yeah. You never said anywhere the idea that one spouse or the other enjoys it more. You know, both Solomon and I think touching on the shorter one first. We're talking that the wife implying both want and need each other. There doesn't seem to be a hierarchy, if you will, of, you know, the man wants and needs the wife more than the wife wants or needs the husband. Paul talks about, you know, in that chapter, he's talking about how he prioritizes singleness, and he thinks that that's, you know, a good idea for people, but that they ought to get married if they are burning with desire, basically. And the context never shows that he's just talking about a man burning with desire. He's talking about people in general, implying that the women are going to be dealing with that desire as well, and are going to need, you know, to deal with temptation or to, you know, get married or whatever it is. It's just very clear in that passage. There's no differentiation there between levels of desire or how much they can enjoy it or want it. And of course, in Song of Solomon, interestingly, the book doesn't start out with Solomon talking about how much he wants the Shulamite woman. It starts out with her talking about wanting him. And I thought that was really profound. It wasn't even just like...
Doesn't it start off with her talking about how hot he is, basically?
Yeah, I mean, the first verse is like, she's talking about how she wants him to kiss her. And it's like, well, okay, she's got some desires there then. And yeah, you don't even have to get into the bulk of the book before you realize that, okay, it's normal and appropriate for a woman to have those desires, because it starts out right there at the beginning.
I heard a preacher point out one time that the woman in the Song of Solomon speaks first, speaks last, and speaks most.
Very wordy.
Yeah, but I mean, but vocal.
Yeah, and, that way.
What's that?
I said we can be that way as women.
Right, but it's in the context of sex and attraction and lovemaking and all of these kinds of things. It's not that again that the guy is, you know, chasing down his woman and dogging after her. There's actually a couple scenes where she's kind of going after him.
Yeah,
very forward.
That's
very Victorian.
Talked about that on the podcast. He was so forward that for women who, if there's a woman listening who, I can't be that forward, you know. You would have for someone like that. Yeah, and another stereotype that this does away with. It's just men that are visual. I think men more visual. The passage where he's describing passage two where she's describing the implication being the physical visual nature of things. It's not just him being visual and being attracted to her. It's vice versa. It's her being just as attracted to him physically as he is to her, which is interesting in this culture where it's all you hear is men are visual. And it's true, they are, but it's not weird if a woman is too.
It's not. And you know what's interesting, as much as all of our blog friends are for mutual sex and pleasure and things like that, because we are still so ingrained with these ideas, I still sometimes see them say things that I think that still plays into the mindset that sex and arousal is just for the husband. I saw somebody do an article the other day about why the wife needs to get undressed for their spouse, which is nothing wrong with that. But I've never once read an article about why I should be getting undressed for myself or for my husband getting undressed for me.
I think you wrote an article about getting undressed.
Well,
in front of the mirror.
I have actually written about that, but like I'm saying, like that's not really an article. I've never seen a blogger say husbands get naked for your wife, or you know.
Hey, here's one.
Narrative.
We did. Keely did a very PG lap dance tutorial one time, and we stressed in that this is not just for women.
It's for both.
You know, and I tell the guys on the blog all the time, I'm like, guys, you want to knock your woman's socks off, give her a lap dance.
Yeah.
You know, you do.
You don't hear that either.
What's that?
That's not something you hear often either.
No. And that's the thing is that actually came out of our own experience, because I think it was the first board game we ever made, the first bedroom game we made, It's Getting Hot in Here. One of the cards, you hop around on little spaces and there's actions for you to do. And one of the actions just said lap dance. And I landed on it and I was like, well, I guess I better roll the dice again. And she was like, no, you better not. She was like, no, that's not just my thing. And I was like, well, why did I assume that it was? Yeah. You know? And again, it's a stereotype, and we just said, no, we're not. Let's fight our own stereotype, you know, that I've got in my head.
Right.
And then we were like, well, hey, this is something we need to pass along. So
what do you think a wife can do to change her mindset, you know, to believe that sexual intimacy and pleasure is for her?
I think, again, immersing yourself, the first step. This may not seem very practical because it's more the spiritual side, and some people, you know, might not see that as very practical. But I think you do need to read those passages that we talked about and see that's perfectly normal. It's in the inspired word of God. Don't freak out over it. You know, like, don't think that if you are visual and you want to be with your husband, that there's something wrong with you. Or if you have a higher sex drive than your husband does, don't think automatically that there's something wrong with you. Because again, like you were saying, we do see kind of her chasing after him, sometimes more so than him chasing after her. So I think viewing it not just from the perspective of God created sex, so it's a good thing, but also it doesn't say he created it for the man, you know, so kind of reorienting your thinking around those truths and that ultimate design, I think would help a lot. I think also educating yourself on human anatomy as a woman. I mean, it sounds very basic, but
whoa. Hang on there. Hang on. Not just the women.
Well, yes, exactly. I agree with you there.
We all need to get a little better acquainted with anatomy, because I vaguely remember 7th grade health class.
Right. Exactly.
There's some stuff since we became bloggers that I went, oh, that's how that works.
Yeah.
You know, I'll be honest. For both ends, you know, for both sets of anatomies here, I've gone, really? Oh, that's a thing? Oh, how about that? You know? But yeah, and that's huge though. It's something as simple as that can radically change things. So I'm sorry, I cut you off. Go ahead.
No, you're good. No, it's true. It's how to design both of you, like you said. It's very for both spouses to know. But as a woman, if you realize God is created in such a way that God is specifically designed to be able to enjoy sex, well, then you realize you're supposed to be able to. Like, you need ability enjoy it. It's not that the man has all whatever, and he's only you are too. And I think as an anatomy, just reminding yourself of all of is intended for that one. There's another one. I believe it's the marriage bed. I may be wrong on, or the act of marriage, something like that. Both of those go through pretty in depth human anatomy for both husband and wife, and like you said, what's going on here? What does that do? You know, that kind of stuff. Because as you start to educate yourself along those lines, you realize, again, it's not just for the man. It's not weird for the woman to enjoy it. It's not strange for her to want to have intimacy with her husband. It's how she was designed too, just as much as he was. And I think just kind of, it all begins for women a lot of times in our minds. And if we can reorient our thinking both around the truths of God's word, but also, you know, along the lines of very practical things as well, in terms of how we're made, then I think that's a starting point anyway. And from there, you can, you know, experiment with your husband, and you can do whatever you need to do to kind of see how you're going to enjoy things and what you enjoy the most. But I think that's a good starting point anyway. Because yeah, a lot of us, like, we get the sex talk, but we don't really get like an in-depth understanding of everything. So I think that's important. I mean, you have couples that have been married for years that probably don't realize all of the capabilities and all the things that could happen because of how we're designed. So yeah, I think, and especially not if you're in that culture where it's just for the man. I mean, a woman who has not been educated along those lines not going to realize that there's more to than so
I think a woman has to have permission to explore, and a husband has to have that permission to explore with his wife too. So if you have said this is just for the husband and the wife's pleasure doesn't really factor into this, then a wife doesn't even have permission for it to feel good. The husband doesn't really have permission to try anything really, because they're already an intruder on the wife.
They're the problem.
The wife is like,
they're the problem.
Yeah. That's definitely some mindset shifts that have to happen for both husband and wife if they both have that shift. So what do you suggest a woman can do to increase her sexual desires?
That's a good question. Yeah. You know, kids 3 and under. And that can be a hard season to be in. And we had our first baby 10 months into our marriage. We got pregnant practically right away. And so, you know, there were times there where we were very just, there's a lot of challenge just even finding time for intimacy, let alone really, you know, getting around to enjoying it. But, you know, I think if we can just think back to why did we marry our spouse in the first place? Like, what is it about our spouse that we love? There's something there somewhere, even if the busyness of life or the fight we had last week or whatever it is, even if we're in a hard season, you know, just thinking back to why did I marry this person is what is good about this person? What do I still respect or admire about this person? Can increase your desire. And if your desire is increased, the likelihood is you're enjoying everything is going to be increased because, you know, we always hear that for, and this might be a stereotype that actually is more true. A lot of everything for the woman in terms of enjoyment starts in her brain. And if she's not really focused, if she's got her to-do list going and she's thinking about the kids or she's thinking about whatever, that's not a very good recipe for anything going well. So we know a mental thing in a lot of ways. You know, are you focused on your husband? What do you love about him? Why do you want to be with him? You know, let the other things can be a really important first step. Because it really does follow from and what are you thinking, and your body tends to follow. Even if one spouse wants to have sex and the other go ahead and go along with it, and they decide that was a good idea. You know, totally in the mood at once you're thinking things get better, whatever enjoy it more, have your desire increased. And really in addition to that, you know, the more often you're intimate, sometimes that can increase your desire to be intimate or your enjoyment when you are. So it's not always, you know, sometimes it's easier said than done in the busyness of life and just life difficulties and things like that. But those are at least some kind of beginning points, I think, for.
So I thought it was interesting. You talked about that mindset and how women will have all these different things on their minds or whatever. I think that, and I, you know, not to discount what husbands are dealing with, but definitely wives and moms have so much pressure on them. And I know you recently wrote a book about lies that moms believe. And do you think that maybe some of those lies kind of keep a woman from expressing herself sexually or being able to be intimate with her spouse?
Absolutely. Yeah, a couple of the ones that come to mind from the book right off the bat are, there's one where we talk about, you know, motherhood is not your ultimate highest calling. You know, that is a lie that it can be sent around, and ultimately it's not. You know, if you're a follower of the Lord, like your ultimate highest calling, you're an image bearer of God, you're an ambassador of Christ, you know, and that gone over into your marriage and your motherhood and your you. This narrative that a woman should be on the kids, the highest calling, the marriage tends to fall by the wayside a little. That can happen anyway in terms of how busy we all are. Especially when we have this that motherhood is where it's at, that is our highest calling. It's easy then to forget about your husband and to be so caught up and so exhausted by the end of the day trying to kill yourself, you know, just getting everything done for the kids, that there is no desire left at the end of the day. There is no energy left. And then another one would be the lie that children ruin a marriage. I think it's possible to let them ruin a marriage, but it does not have to be a necessary outcome of having kids. At the end of the day, it's all about, what are your priorities? What do you want to be intentional about doing? Not to say it's easy. Again, I've got 2 kids, 3 and under. So it's not easy sometimes, you know, with sleep issues or just all the physicality that goes into raising little people when they're at the really early ages. But it doesn't have to be this necessary thing where you have kids and well, there goes the marriage. The honeymoon phase over, but all the rest of it is it really is what is fun. What do you decide to prioritize?
Well, that's awesome, guys. Y'all can get her book off of Amazon. There is a purchase now button right here on this page. So you guys are welcome to do that. I'm sure you can go to her website too to look for it. I assume, right, Rebekah?
Yes.
I'm going to assume it's on your website. I wouldn't say that my book was easily accessible on my website, so I would definitely, you know, go down here and look for
work on that.
Yeah, I was just thinking that, like, I wonder if someone could find it easily on our site. So I have a couple of reader questions that we would love to talk about. So I, you know, always tell the readers, I know sometimes these are kind of sensitive questions, and I like to read them anonymously if they email me or submit through Messenger. So I had a couple people email, and if you are watching us live and want to leave your question, you're welcome to do that. So the first question I had come through was, so the lady says, I have low libido because of hormones. I've been trying to fix that. I'm struggling. My husband is grateful for our time together, even though I'm not super enthusiastic, but I feel grumpy from the hormones. I feel like an inadequate lover. How do I act like I'm enjoying sex when I have low libido? I mean, should I just act or what?
You know, obviously, that's a hard question. A lot of, you know, a husband wants to know that he is pleasing his wife. So obviously some people would probably say, yeah, put on an act because you don't want to let your husband down. You don't want to make him feel bad. But I would say communication is so important that I don't think I would advise that. Now, some people may disagree with me, and that's okay. I would say be open and honest with him. Tell him, you know what? I'm not really enjoying this or that at this particular moment. But let's find something else we can do. Let's find something I could enjoy. Let's experiment. Let's work together. It requires vulnerability, and that is awkward sometimes with things like this. But I would just encourage honesty, open communication, share your heart, explain. And if he knows that it is a hormone-related thing, it's not going to bother him from the standpoint of, oh, you don't want to be with me. Oh, you're not satisfied. You don't like me. You know, whatever it could be. He's going to know it's a physical health-related issue. And it happens for a lot of people. It is not just this, you know, spouse. It is not a strange thing that doesn't happen. And him then realizing that, or this other spouse realizing that, it's going to help because he's not going to feel, you know, if we're talking about a wife with a husband, the husband's not going to feel like he's letting her down or like he's not good enough. So I think if they can just keep the lines of communication open and realize it doesn't have to necessarily look a certain way, they can work together. Their marriage is their own. You know, as long as they're not breaking some command or sinning in some way, there's a lot of freedom. And you can work together to find out what works best for you. As you're kind of going through the process of seeking hormone therapy, or if you have an issue with lubrication because of your hormones, options for that, obviously. So there's just a lot of different things that you can try, trial and error. And I would just say, think back again. Love about your husband. Something you Something you necessarily going to problem. So that is a thing. But it could potentially help. Yeah.
Right.
And I think keep the communication lines open.
Definitely with the communication for sure. And you know, what I always like to ask a person who says that they have low libido, I like to ask them, do they really have low libido? Because I think women have this idea that we are supposed to get sexually aroused before we have sex. And that's actually just not what happens for a lot of women. Not to say that that never happens for you, but if you aren't feeling a lot of like, I'm ready to go sexually, I mean, that is not a sign of low libido. That's just a sign that you're a lady.
Right.
And that, you know,
it can be. It's like what I said earlier. Sometimes you don't really know if you're feeling like it right now, but then it all kind of, can come together.
I think that.
So to clarify, what you mean was that just means that you're a typical woman, not a lady, as opposed to trash.
No,
something.
I'm just saying that means you're a woman.
Because that just means
a woman in
a lady. Because if you do feel sexual arousal, you're a tramp.
No, what I'm saying is that
stereotype.
You're a female.
You're a female.
Okay, you're a woman.
And a lot of women do not feel sexual arousal until they've got direct stimulation. And because that's not what we see in movies, that's not how our husband responds sexually. You know, our husband's got to get sexually aroused before anything can happen. Women think, I'm supposed to be sexually aroused. I don't even desire sex right now. You know what? Half the time I don't either until we're starting to have sex. So I always ask a woman, like, is it really low libido? Or maybe you just have the wrong expectation of what you should be experiencing, feeling before sex. Because I put sex on the calendar so that we have it.
Yeah, sometimes you have to. I've heard
people. I mean, that
would be like. But I think it can build anticipation, which there's something to be said for that too. So I don't see a problem with that. It can actually help things along.
It does. I put it on the calendar because I'm not going to be in the mood. Just because we're having sex doesn't mean that I was in the mood to have it. I mean, that's like regular. But by the time we get going, I'm in the mood. So I think sometimes we don't really understand sexual drive. You know, that goes back to just understanding anatomy and how sex works for women.
Yeah.
So another question my reader has. Okay, so this isn't 100% the question they asked, but I want to ask this question because I think they were sort of getting to this. And I told that reader we were going to address this question in another live. But what should I do if my spouse wants sex acts that don't please me, but are just for their benefit? Is it okay to do things for them that don't do that much for me?
I think so. I mean, I think if you're doing it from that lie that sex is just to meet your husband's needs, that might be problematic. So that needs to be taken care of first. But yeah, if we do come at it, again, like we said at the very beginning, that the act of intimacy, that sex is for both, that each spouse should be looking to the needs and desires of the other, then yeah, I don't see a problem with that. I think you need to set right. Picture that it is for both, that both need to be taken into consideration. But it can be a way of, and I don't want to use this phrase like to make it sound like I'm going against what I've already said, but it can be a way to serve your spouse. Not in a, sex is all about you, but it can be a way to love your spouse still. That as long as, you are, we're all the concept for both, for both to desire, hopefully, But yeah, if that is a thing, a problem with it, I think fine. And if she is and it really, she's like whatever, like would you maybe there's something that I would like that maybe you could do for me. It could be, again, your marriage, as long as you're not breaking some command or something, you've got so much freedom and you can work together. And really that builds intimacy even more than just the act of intimacy itself. As you grow together, get to know each other better, know each other's likes and dislikes, each other's bodies, all of that, it builds your intimacy. And so I think it can potentially be really helpful.
And you bring up an interesting balancing act that you have to maintain as a married couple, that we have to fight that cultural lie that we're identifying here, that sex is just for the man. We have to fight that, but then we don't want to like jerk the wheel and overcorrect. And you were alluding to this, that it is still for the other person. That you have to find a way to free yourself, as Keely often says, free yourself to enjoy sex. Wives have to do that. Men have to do that. But then still keep the focus on the spouse, keep the focus on the other person. And this can be a way to do that. That if your spouse is asking about something or desiring something that is going to be fantastic for them, and it's not going to really do much of anything or anything for you, maybe you go ahead and do that. Again, like you said, not from the standpoint of, well, it's not really about me anyway, I'm just an unwilling participant, but saying, this is how I'm going to serve my spouse. And then I like what you said there. The other spouse should keep in mind, hey, now it's their turn.
Yeah.
And we've talked about that before. Yeah, exactly. We've talked about that before, that whether it is different days, different lovemaking sessions, or in the same session, that you just sort of take turns.
Yeah.
Maybe you say, hey, tonight is going to be for you, and I want to try that thing that you've been wanting to do. And, then another time it goes the other way around. Or like I said, just while you're having your time together that particular time, like, okay, I'm going to do this thing for you, but then it's my turn,
Right.
and that can work where that's a tough balance of saying, it's for both of us. That's what we titled this interview. Sex is for both of you. So that means you have to give yourself permission to say it is for me, but then also remember it is for your spouse.
Right.
So.
And I think it helps to remember, that you are one, that is part of the design of marriage. And then if you're looking at it from that point of view, and whatever you're doing to serve, so to speak, your spouse, you come right back around if you need to. You are one. It is not, you are partners in this marriage. You are not, you're individuals, obviously. But you are one. The it brings you together and good for the other. As you work that back and that perspective.
Yeah, that is difficult for a lot of couples. So now the last question is actually a very difficult question. And I just want to preface this by saying that neither Rebekah, Austin, and I are certified counselors in any way. We just, we care about your marriage. And this reader says that she and her husband have been married for 20 years and there was an affair. They haven't had sex in a year. And she wants to know, how do we start back into intimacy? And my first recommendation is you guys need to go to counseling. So if that hasn't occurred,
and I guess we have to approach this question from the assumption that there's been reconciliation,
right?
That he has admitted to the affair. I mean, obviously she knows about it,
right?
That he fessed up to it, that he has put an end to it, that he is trying to rebuild the marriage. Because if none of those, if some of those things are not true, then we got nothing else to say. You got to start. Yeah, you got to start there. You got to start there. There's got to be forgiveness. There's got to be repentance and a change of heart on his part. There's got to be a willingness on her part to forgive. I mean, there's a lot of tough groundwork to be done there. And then if that's all done and you're getting counseling,
what would you suggest?
Yeah. Well, so I know. We again, like you said, forgiveness. The gospel is so. It's not just. It's for the here and now too. It comes about when you're seeking. So if there's been and you know about it, and you may be working together, you may be in counseling, like you said, you may be on that right path. The enemy still, because the enemy hates marriage and all that it represents, the enemy is still going to come in and try to plant those seeds of doubt in her mind. Well, you can't trust him because he did this. Or I wonder if he's still being faithful to you now. He may have repented, but maybe he's doing something you don't know about now. Or maybe he's thinking about it or whatever. There can be a bunch of seeds of doubt there. And it can be hard to build trust back up. But I would say if you can just be on your knees in prayer, like prayer is huge. And if you can try to take those thoughts captive and replace them with whatever the truth is. If you have a husband who has repented, like you said, Austin, who is repentant and he's seeking your forgiveness, you at some point, I understand it's going to be hard to trust, and I get that that's a process to rebuild that, and I don't want to belittle that at all. But I would say at some point, you got to trust the Lord with it. You may not be able to trust your husband right now, but you got to trust the Lord with it. And pray for your marriage, surround it in prayer. Pray against the enemy, who again, in your mind or will see by causing you to think someone else. All those different things. Have to just be super active to take every thought. And that's fine. No matter what it is. It's hard, but I think on that, we're praying. It doesn't seem super practical, but I would say that is a starting point. That is a way to guard your build intimacy and pray for your trust him right now. But pray that you'd be able to trust him again. Pray that he'd be trustworthy. Again, there are other things that, you could learn from a counselor, and that a lot of different things. Maybe a pastor, if you're going to a church, a pastor and his wife, maybe sit down with them, or an older couple that you know and respect, or whoever it is that you trust and you feel like would be good at advising you. But I do think prayer is so crucial, because if we're just left to our own devices and caught up in our own minds, it's not a pretty picture. And so I would say, we just got to be active, no matter who we are, no matter whether we've been through this kind of situation or not. We all, on a daily basis, should be careful to take those thoughts captive, in our marriages, against thoughts that would try to infiltrate and would cause harm. So it may not seem like the easiest answer. It may not seem like the most helpful, but I think that is definitely something to remember, and, possibly a good starting place as you're kind of going down that path of healing. And remember that God is in the redemption business still. The end has not come yet. God can still change hearts. He can still redeem everything. He can, take your marriage from shambles and make it stronger than it's ever been. I mean, all things are possible with God. There's no limiting him. And so I would keep my eyes focused and fixed on Christ, and remember the cross. Just keep your eyes on him. Don't look so much to your husband. Keep your eyes on Christ. And that will at least encourage you. Kind of help you down that path.
Yeah, that's really tough. And, intimacy leads to intimacy. So I know that a lot of women aren't able to really engage in sexual intimacy until they feel close to their spouse, which can be difficult because husbands often feel close to their spouse when there is sexual intimacy. So I just always recommend start somewhere to build intimacy with your spouse and let it grow from there.
Yeah, I mean,
maybe not full on sex right away.
Yeah. You can almost view it as being back. Start wherever. You're both comfortable with, and you're interested in doing. Yeah, it's a great idea. Just start wherever, and it's making out on the couch. Like just literally just wherever, and just go from there. Yeah.
Agreed. Well, Rebekah, thank you for coming on and talking about all this stuff with us. And all of our viewers, guys, please go check her out on her podcast. It's Hargraves Hearth and Home, right?
Well, the website is Hargraves Home and Hearth. I know all that alliteration, but the podcast is the Home and Hearth podcast.
The Home and Hearth podcast. You guys can go check out her link on this page. And also don't forget to stop by Amazon and check out her book, Moms. What is it? Lies
Moms Believe. Moms are liars, and you better believe it.
That's it. Mom, oops, I shouldn't have written that book.
That's right. Let's not do that.
Don't search that one out. That's a fiction book.
Right.
So yeah, definitely check out all of the things down below. You'll find the link directly to her website, and you checked that link and it was working accurately, right?
Yes.
Because I'm pretty sure that I put Hearth and Home about 15 times in the last couple of days. So I think I've gotten that backwards, but
her link is definitely working.
I copied and pasted the link. So
Okay.
that should be working.
As long as I say you're we're good.
That's right. So I also have our link down below to our website. There's also a link at the very bottom about the Love, Hope, Adventure community, where we got like-minded couples to talk about communication and intimacy and marriage. It's just a great open forum to do that. There's a video course that comes along with that. All the details are down there if you click the pretty purple button. What else? She's got a podcast.
She's got a podcast.
We don't have a podcast, but we're thinking about turning these into a podcast. I don't know. We might see. What's that?
That's your department.
That's my department. Yeah.
So there you go.
I didn't catch that. What'd you say?
I said podcasting is super.
It is. Hey, speaking of, you said your husband's into sci-fi. I'm going to throw out our podcast. Me and my older two boys do a Doctor Who podcast because that's how we roll. And it's called Noobs and the Whovian because they've never seen it before and I have. So if you search that, and we're in all the places, just like Rebekah mentioned, except we're in Google Play. We beat you. We beat you.
Step above.
That probably wasn't a thing when you started your podcast. So
yeah, look into it.
NOOBS and the HOVIAN, Noobs and the Whovian.
Awesome. Well, and my sister-in-law too is really big into Doctor Who. So
who's that?
My sister-in-law.
Perfect. Well, and the thing is, like I said, our goal is to introduce a new generation of kids to Doctor Who. So we do it from the perspective of, again, a dad who's seen it before and two young kids who haven't, a 12-year-old and an 11-year-old. And listen, I started the thing. I call myself the producer, but Tripp is our audio engineer. He sets up the soundboard and the mics and does all that. Corbin is our editor and producer, where he puts it all together and actually puts it up on SoundCloud and syndicates and everything. So it's a family effort. So it's a family show. Obviously, we're family friendly and everything. So check that out while you're checking out her podcast. You got two to subscribe to this week. If you want to get in touch with us, you can find us, Love Hope Adventure, on Facebook at .com/LoveHopeAdventure. You can find us on Instagram and the Twitters and all over the interwebs. What was the other thing? You can email us at Keely@LoveHopeAdventure or Austin@LoveHopeAdventure. We know that when you guys are sending us questions or information or things like that, suggestions, that you're doing that in confidentiality with confidence. And so we take that very seriously. We don't ever share that information unless you give us explicit permission to do so. So if you've got something you want to throw our way, let us know. It may appear on the blog, may appear on another interview one day. So thank you for joining us. Rebekah, thank you so much for being here. And I think that's all we've got for tonight. So
As
always, guys, we love you and we love your marriage. We'll see you around next time.
Night, everyone.